Leadership. One of the most important aspects of leadership is communication. And one of the most important aspects of communication is storytelling. That's why I'm so excited to mention the Stories with Traction course with you. In this course, you will learn how to be a great storyteller. I share concepts with you on how you can boost sales, enhance your internal communication and marketing, and create a vibrant company culture. If you're looking to build a story bank for your organization and utilize a framework to persuade more effectively, go check out the course in the show notes, the Stories with Traction course. Now, on to the podcast. Persuading people to take the actions we want can be hard. Our teams and clients are bombarded with thousands of messages every single day. But there is a way for you to get above the noise. Stories. This is the Stories with Traction podcast, and I'm your host, Matt Zaun. Join my guests and me as we unpack the power of storytelling. We'll talk about topics like leadership, sales, and marketing, all through the lens of strategic storytelling. Enjoy this episode. I love talking with people all over the United States. I like looking for different themes. What continues to come to the surface? And what amazes me is how many leaders want to have an impact through corporate social responsibility, but they don't know how to do it. They don't even know where to start. And I'm really excited for this conversation because today I'm joined by Chanel Cook. Chanel is the Public Affairs Officer at the Erie VA Medical Center. In addition, she's an adjunct instructor at Mercyhurst University, where she specializes in organizational leadership. Welcome to the Stories of Traction podcast.
Thanks, Matt. Glad to be here.
I very much appreciate your time. I know how busy you are. And I just want to unpack different elements of where leaders can put not only their financial resources, but also their time. They want to give back to the community and they don't really know where to start. And I'm so glad that you had the opportunity to come on as far as our schedules matching up. I know you and I had met 4 years ago. I can't believe it's been 4 years since we met. I was speaking in Erie and we actually met, and it was just awesome. And I love learning a little bit about what you do. And you do a lot. You've served on a lot of boards, right? Like I don't know if I know someone else that's served on more boards than you have. So you've done a lot. So let's start with your why. Why do you have a desire to give back through nonprofits?
I think my desire for giving back through nonprofits really started because I was called out by a colleague many years ago. I think I was in my 20s. I was working for a member of Congress at the time. A colleague came in for a meeting and flat out said, where else are you? Where are you serving? What are you doing? And I was puzzled thinking, well, I'm here, I'm working, I'm very busy. I'm also a mom. So that's my life in a nutshell right now. And at the time I was pondering grad school, and he told me about a program that assists folks with learning how to be productive, efficient board members who could impact change. And he highly recommended that I participate in that program. So I let it marinate for a little while, and then I took him up on his advice and joined the program. I applied, was accepted, and here I am today. I've served on 19 boards since about 2005.
19.
Right. So I accepted the
Wow.
challenge and I hit the ground running.
So you accepted the challenge in a big, big way. Wow.
Yes.
Well, I think accepting that challenge really speaks a lot about you as a person, right? For someone, you mentioned you were called out. Where are you? What else are you doing? To really receive that call, I mean, it takes a tremendous amount of almost humility, character on your part to shift and grow into the person you are today.
Thank you. I consider myself a lifelong learner. And so being called out was really helpful for me at the time, because basically he was saying is we know you're capable of doing this work here in the office, but how are you capable of helping your community? Where is your voice? And specifically at the time, where was the voice of a Black professional woman? And so I understood his point, and I can't say enough about board service. Giving back, whether it's your time, your talent, or your treasure, is really important. And it's up for you to decide how you do that. And if it speaks to your morals, your values, your belief, and the calling and purpose that you believe you have on your life, then you should go for it. Make the time and just do it.
All right, so I appreciate you mentioned that. And I want to unpack what you just said and dive a little bit deeper. So a lot of people that are going to listen to this episode are really focused on business. So they're focused on their enterprise and really serving their clients, their customers. But a lot of them, and I hear this as a recurring theme, impact is just a word that comes up all the time. Individuals, they want to have an impact. And what amazes me is I've had the opportunity to meet with a lot of successful people. It's been a blessing, like sitting at the feet, figuratively speaking, learning from some unbelievably successful people in the business world. And what amazes me is it doesn't matter what level of financial resources someone has. A lot of people, even once they reach like the top tier of financial prosperity, they still want to give back, right? They still want to have that impact. And a lot of them don't know where to start. Okay, so they turn to boards. You had mentioned you're a part of 19 boards. They turn to boards. They don't know much about boards. They don't know how to serve on a board. They've done well at C-suite with corporate America, or maybe they're entrepreneurs and they've run their companies, but they don't know how it differs with a board. So I know that you've also rubbed shoulders with very successful business people as well. Have you noticed a difference between being on a board, let's say in a corporate America, versus board nonprofit? And what would be one or maybe some of those differences?
Well, I think for corporate America, the impact is going to be different. You're thinking about how are you going to show the community that your dollars are matching your words, and that you are being responsible stewards to your consumers and to your board. And that's not always a delicate, balance. It depends on what you're really trying to do. What's your aim? What's your goal? And so a lot of times that can get lost in stakeholder viewpoints, perspectives, and those stakeholders can be members of your board, but those can also be, folks that go to Congress every day and vote. So from a corporate social responsibility, that perspective, that big picture perspective is very different versus on a nonprofit scale. We are talking smaller nonprofits, in the heart of inner city communities and neighborhoods. Their work is really led out of sheer need. And so it's very important to talk one on one to those nonprofit leaders, find out what they need the most. Sometimes we find that folks who lead large organizations want to go to grant making bodies first, and they have these great, wonderful, well intentioned panels. I've been a member of some of those panels. And sometimes what we find is those grant making entities don't always have their finger on the pulse of the community, which is why, if, in my opinion, if you are a large donor and you want to do good in the community and you have a couple of places in mind, talk to the leadership at those nonprofits first. Talk to the staff, find out what keeps them up at night. What is missing? What are those foundational building blocks that they need your help with? And you will often find that those things don't always match up with what the larger grant making bodies or foundations would like you to put your money into. So basically, what I'm saying is they're often diametrically opposed. So you have to find that sweet spot in the middle where you can satisfy the need in the community, but also hear what the funders or the grant making bodies are hoping to accomplish. And if you can, which is my recommendation, get them both to meet in the middle and talk to one another about the needs for the foundation or the grant making body and the needs of the community. So you can really get to the heart of the matter and frame those grant proposals, those RFPs in a manner that really truly meets the needs of the community, not the grant making body.
Interesting. So let me just make sure I'm getting this right to clarify. So if someone's a large donor, they have a lot of financial resources. You would recommend they talk to staff members at smaller nonprofits?
I do. I think they
Okay.
should talk to the leadership and the staff at those smaller nonprofits, or even if it's a mid-size or large nonprofit, you want to find out from the staff what would be the best use of the funds and what language is appropriate. That's another thing we need to talk more about when we talk about corporate and social responsibility. Let's move away from census words. Those census tract identifiers are not well suited for the conversations that we need to have, and where we need to pour our money into to make lasting and impactful change. I think one of the things that concerns me as I've moved up as a leader, an active member in my community, but also as a board member, is we find ourselves at times removed from situations at hand, right? Because our lives are progressing. And so we might have a viewpoint that's more specific to where we are now, not where we started, right? And so as we elevate in life, our situation changes, our perspective changes, but that doesn't mean people aren't still behind where we started. And so that's what grant making bodies, foundations, boards have to be mindful of when they are making decisions that could impact the trajectory of someone else's life or the lifespan of that nonprofit. So it's about mindful, intentional investment.
I love that. I'm actually writing this down. Mindful, intentional investment. So I really want to unpack something that you said I think is really important. You mentioned about perspectives changing. It's amazing to me, and I'm not the only one. This is human nature, but it's amazing. We're so focused on the here and now that we do forget elements of our story. And it's
Absolutely.
interesting to just take time and sit down and think about where we've come. For all of us, there are situations that, I mean, I might get frustrated with today that would have been a dream a couple of years ago. And it just
Yes.
kind of shows like we're in our little bubble, so to speak, now because we're focused on what we're going through now. But I mean, half a decade ago, we could have gone through a very severe situation that we're actually forgetting because we don't have instant recall with that. And other members of our community could be experiencing the exact situation we went through 5 years ago. But because we forgot, our pulse regarding that
Mhm.
situation might be off. So I appreciate you mentioning that.
Thank you.
Mindful intention. I like that. I like that a lot. So you mentioned, I love the alliteration, the time, talent, treasure that you mentioned. And I think a lot of people, especially if they're large donors, they think of that treasure, right? Just writing big checks. But you and I both know that often, especially if we're going to talk smaller nonprofits, they need volunteers, right? They need
Right.
time. So what would you recommend to someone from like a balancing act, happy medium, try to have a healthy element of time, talent, treasure? How would you recommend people focus on that time and talent piece? Obviously, there are very few nonprofits that would turn down big checks, right? But how would you recommend people utilize their time and talent in a way aside from financial resources?
I think the time and talent piece for me that I've seen most helpful is looking at it from an infrastructure viewpoint because nonprofits by and large have big dreams and small teams. That's just the reality of it. Especially here in Northwest Pennsylvania, Erie, where I live, is chock full of dreams and needs. And so I think that the time and talent is really important. And how are we going to go about strengthening the infrastructure of these nonprofits that are well suited, um, to help the communities in which they live and serve, but they need those foundational elements, those building blocks in their own teams before they can truly be great at something. Um, you know, Sometimes good enough is not enough. And I find that in nonprofit spaces, we're often working from a good enough standpoint. And I like to think from a good, better, best, right? You should do better. The more you know, the further you go. All those cliche sayings, they're true. And so I think from a time and talent perspective, you want to be able to build the infrastructure so that people can do things well and not good enough.
Okay, I like that. I appreciate you mentioning that. I think that's very sound advice, especially the big dreams, small teams. It's amazing. There are a lot of nonprofits out there that they're doing incredible work. I mean, work that needs to be
Yes.
done. But it's exactly what you're saying. They have these massive dreams, but they don't have the resources to pull it off. So I appreciate you
Right.
mentioning that. I do want to talk about strategy, though. I think there's definitely a difference about someone's heart being with a certain cause and having strategy to back up where those heartstrings are. And what I mean is someone might be well equipped to help in a certain way, but their heart's in another direction and there's no strategy. And it's almost like they're not doing as much as they could because it's really not their expertise, but
Mhm.
yet their heart's in it. Now, this may be the simple answer is they just need to have both. But I see this all the time is let's say there's a very large software company and the leadership team of this software company, they're heavily investing in nonprofits that have nothing to do with software, that have nothing to do. And when you mention the talent piece, they could be helping other nonprofits, maybe even through their software and the different things that they utilize as a business. So where would you recommend someone looks at, all right, my heart's in this over here, but they're not equipped from any kind of background whatsoever to do anything with that, but their heart's in it. What would you recommend to that person? How do they actually effectively utilize time, talent, treasure if they don't really know much about that? They're not experts in that.
Right. I guess for me, from a problem solving perspective, my first thought is I'm an SME. I'm a subject matter expert in X. I need to find another counterpart, a colleague, a peer, a stranger that I haven't met yet. I need to seek recommendations from my network, my spheres of influence and affluence. Who are the SMEs? Who are those subject matter experts in the area, the sector that I'm not a part of? Um, and people love talking about themselves. We're sitting here talking today. We met 4 years ago, and I found out you tell great stories, and I said, "Ooh, I want to learn from Matt." So we stayed we stayed connected on LinkedIn. But that's how you grow your network. That's how you grow in learning. And so if your goal is to help others, you have to learn how to help yourself first. So I would say seek other experts
Sure.
for whatever
Okay.
that thing is. Yeah.
So that would be so almost like what you kind of started out saying. You were called out, you were challenged, right? So you
Mhm.
were challenged by someone. So essentially allowing someone to challenge us. If we have our heart for something, but we don't know much about it, we need to be challenged to learn about that, to make the connections, to humble ourselves and listen to try to affect change.
Absolutely, because we all suffer from the we don't know what we don't know, but other humans are poised to point that out for us, and that's okay. That's not a bad thing. We're all learning and growing every single day, but absolutely lean on the folks in your community. And I love the idea, PS, because infrastructure from a tech perspective at nonprofits is severely lacking. So if anyone listening to your podcast is an SME in tech, find a nonprofit, find several nonprofits to help. That's my charge for you today.
That's awesome. That's awesome. And it's amazing how creative some businesses can be if they really want to do this. And some of them, I'm not saying it's easy, but in some cases, it might be more simple than we make it out to be. So, as an example, I was working with a gentleman not too long ago, and this individual had a massive conference room within his business that they only used once a week. So he opened it up to numerous nonprofits. They needed meeting space. They were about ready to pay for meeting space. He said, "Why don't you come? You can use my space for a few times a week." That was that
Hmm.
not necessarily talent, but it kind of ties into talent and treasure. So
Hmm.
he has this business. It's an awesome business and a huge space, and they are giving up resources. It wasn't really costing them any more money. They were still going to pay the lease on the building that they were in, regardless. They just weren't using
Right.
it. So it's a creative way. It's a simple way to help. Now, I do want to quickly shift and kind of mention this to you because I'm
Sure.
interested to hear what you have to say regarding your public affairs, like PR expertise. How does a company still have their heart in the community? They still want to do good because it's the right thing to do, but also tout it to the community. I know there's a lot of businesses that, for whatever reason, they don't want to talk about it.
Hmm.
Is there a right way and a wrong way to do this as far as touting what they're doing?
From my perspective, I really think it's important to humanize and localize the help, right? So you let those folks who are recipients of the help speak for the larger company. So, in other words, that humility is we're going to step aside and allow them to tell you how it's working. We're going to allow them to tell you how they said, this is what we need from big company, right? This is what we need from you to help us get where we'd like to go. And being mindful that together you can impact the change. And it's not about bragging, it's about promoting and advocating, showing that corporate social responsibility of from with good intention is always a good thing. And so I think it can be done well. It can be done locally, even for those large global companies. You know, we don't need the big picture view every day. Sometimes we need to know, is my neighbor being helped? Right. And I think that's the most important way to show impact is to localize it. Show that you're doing good in the communities where your employees live, work, and play.
I love that. Humanize it and localize it. I love that.
Hmm.
Now, I'm sure you've seen companies not do this well, where they're literally only giving to brag. Can you think of it, maybe not specific, but can you think of a case where a company might not do this well and it actually hurts their ability to connect with the community? Maybe trust is eroded in some way, just simply, hey, I'm going to check mark, right? It's just another check in the box. They're not actually doing what you're saying with good intentions. They're just doing it to brag.
Well, I think that's a charge for the marketing team, right? Is they need to determine their strategy in localizing that content because we know that the global content is not what the local small community, in small town USA, they're not looking for that. They're not impressed by, the flashing lights and the big huge checks. They want to see who's rolling up their sleeves, who's putting in the work, who's coming to those late night meetings, who is sacrificing their personal time or talent or treasure to be down in the trenches with the everyday human being. They appreciate the big company's assistance, but they appreciate it more when the money is where the mouth is, where the people are. And so I think if you want to gain trust, you need to make sure that you are actively pursuing whatever the goal is, that you're not just writing the check all the time. If you are writing the check, you should be maintaining relationships. You should make sure that those goals are met. And if they're not, ask why. What's happening? What didn't we do right versus what is the nonprofit doing wrong? Where can we build that infrastructure? How can we help you get to point A, B, and C that we talked about when we first approached you about helping? That's what I think. If you want to build trust, it has to be about relationships. You need to know who's in the community. What are they doing? Where do their kids go to school? What keeps them up at night? Those things are more important at the end of the day. That's how you make impact.
That's a really good point. Thank you for sharing that. For people listening that they have never been a board member, but they want to be a board member, what would be one or maybe some recommendations that you would recommend they do right out of the gate? First 90 days of them being a board member, you would recommend they do what?
I would recommend that they make sure that they, one, check their ego, identify why they're there to help, how they plan to help. They should also, in my opinion, before actually joining the board, observe the board because you can tell at community events or at board meetings that are open to the public whether you are going to fit in or not. And by fit in, I don't mean in the traditional sense of let me just fit in this little space. I mean, what's your role? Are you going to be a disruptor? That's usually what I'm known as. I come in, I observe, I analyze, I figure out where my time, talent, and treasure is best suited. And if I want to stay, how long I'm going to commit before I decide that my work is done and it's time for me to move on to something else. So I think it's just like approaching a new job. Volunteering is work. At the
Hmm.
core of what you're doing as a volunteer, you are working and in most cases working for free. And on top of that, paying to do the work. So yes, your heart should be in it. Your intention should be in it. And if it's not, you need to ask yourself, am I doing this for the right reasons? Volunteering on a board is not to be seen, not to have your name in a program booklet. It's about doing the work.
Doing the work. I like that. Now, what about for people listening that they are board members, but they've been board members for quite some time, maybe years? Is there something that you'd recommend that they do? Because sometimes we're set in our ways, right? Sometimes we get
Mhm.
involved in something and then almost like what you said about perspective changes, right? We're
Right.
in it and we forget about different things. Is there anything you'd recommend to individuals? They've been a board member for quite some time to kind of have that spark again, kind of understand and unpack and maybe have more creativity. And you mentioned disrupting. How do you disrupt a board that's been together for years and they're not making the change that they need to make in the community? What would you recommend to that individual?
I think that individual should first and foremost be themselves, remind themselves of why they started. I'll be honest with you, Matt, I've been there, and I've reached out to leadership at nonprofits and said, hey, this is where my life is right now. This is all that I can offer. Is that going to work for you? You know, I did the work in the beginning and now I'm finding myself at the tail end of my service. And so my time is no longer as available as it used to be. Is that okay? Can I help identify some other people in the community to the nominating committee? Am I meeting folks for coffee, lunch, or dinner on behalf of that board and then sending those people to them as, you know, potential candidates? What am I doing and what am I doing and is what I'm doing enough? If it's not, then you need to resign. And I found myself in that place as well. And that is okay because you're opening up a spot for someone else who can take on the challenge. And there's nothing wrong with that. That means you turn your attention and your time and your skills to something else where you're needed at that age and stage in your life.
Sure. Yeah, absolutely. And journeys change, right? Different elements of our journey changes. Sometimes we
Every
have
day.
to every day. Very true. That's a good point. Well, thank you for your time. I appreciate it. I know you're extremely busy. I just appreciate everything that you mentioned. I know that people got a lot out of it. I have three specific takeaways that I'm going to take from our conversation. I really appreciate what you said regarding the large donor, that if someone has a lot of financial resources, they want to give, they should talk to staff members at smaller nonprofits because they're going to get a pulse for the community, what's happening. I really appreciate that. And I appreciate you mentioning big dreams, small teams. There's so many incredible nonprofits across the United States, and they have just that. They have huge dreams for helping, giving back, impacting the community, but they do have these small teams. So I appreciate that. I also appreciate that you had mentioned perspectives change. And I think people really need to focus on that and they need to spend time in that, maybe sit down and try to think about different experiences they've gone through in their life that they're not in those stages anymore. We just recently mentioned different journeys in life. And we could be thinking about where we are in the here and now, but other people might be experiencing maybe something we went through 5 years ago or we went through a decade ago, and we can't lose sight of that. So I appreciate that second point that you made. And the third point, I really appreciate you mentioning humanize and localize the help. And I think that's a really good gauge to be intentional, not to just do it for attention and to write big checks and get all kinds of like bragging rights, so to speak, but asking the simple question, is this helping my neighbor? So I love that, humanize and localize. So those are going to be my big three takeaways. So thanks again. I very much appreciate your time. If people want to get more information on this, maybe they might have a question, where's the best way that they can reach out to you?
On LinkedIn, I'm there, Chanel M. Cook, MSOL. You can find me through a simple search, and I'd be happy to chat with anyone who has questions. Present, chat, talk to your board, talk to your staff. I'm available for that. However, I can help. I'm a helper by nature, and if time and space aligns, then I'll be there.
Perfect. Well, thank you so much. I appreciate that. I appreciate that offer as well. I will include your LinkedIn in the show notes. People could just click go and connect with you from there. So thanks again for your time, Chanel. I very much appreciate it.
Thanks, Matt. Have a great afternoon.
Thank you for listening to the Stories with Traction podcast. Please leave a review, since positive reviews will make it easier for others to find this conversation. Next episode will launch on Friday at 8 a.m. Eastern. Until then, remember, if you want to persuade with power and inspire those around you to action, you must share more stories.